first training, our first webinar that we're going to be presenting to everyone here through this go-to training system. And we capped it at about 50 people just to kind of make things a little more intimate and engaging, and kind of not that this is a test run by any means, but just to keep it a little smaller and more manageable. So for those of you who are on, and those of people who are getting on right now, just really appreciate your time and taking the time out of your day to learn about who we are and what we do as a company. So we actually have people from all over the world joining us today, which is really cool. A lot of people here in the United States, which is where, as a company, ActivMotion is based. But also, we have people from Africa, Russia, Asia, and South America. So, pretty diverse group. It's obviously different times all across the world. So for some of you, it's late at night, early in the morning, and I really appreciate you kind of making time, probably throwing off your sleep patterns a little bit to come and join us. So my name's Derek. I'm the founder of ActivMotion Bar, and I assisted in the creation of our education as well. Our company, we launched at the beginning of 2014, so we're still very new, although I don't want to have that have any negative connotation. Our company is growing very well as we expand and bring value to people all across the world in the way of fitness and education. So again, really appreciate everyone joining us here. And again, this is being recorded, and it will go up on our website and all of our social media channels immediately after we're done, in case you miss anything, or in case you just want to go back and reference what we discussed today. So again, I'm Derek. I'm the founder of ActivMotion. But I don't want to take credit for everything that has been developed up to this point. So I thought it would be cool just to get you guys familiar with our family, our education team here. There's really 8 of us at the core that developed ActivMotion training. And, it really was a team effort, and we are a team. And I thought it would just be important to reference that and kind of get you more familiar with who we are. So I'm sure, a lot of you are familiar with at least one person on our education team. We're very fortunate to have a very well-respected group of people who work with us. This isn't, our entire education team. We also have some master trainers, and we are growing our list of master trainers as we expand, which is great. This is kind of like the core, right? This is the group that we started with and kind of launched with. So we have Robert, Abby, Sergeant Ken, Hillis, Julie, Pete, and Dr. Mike from the Titleist Performance Institute, who kind of who've created the training, and that's our team. So I have really just 2 main goals through this training. First of all, I really want you to leave with just a foundational level of understanding of ActivMotion training and ActivMotion Bar, and then 2. I really want you to have a clear idea of how this system, so we have ActivMotion training, which is the education, the modality, then we have ActivMotion bars, which are the products, and that creates the system, right? How this can bring value and benefits to either you or the people you serve every day, whether or not you're a trainer or a fitness facility owner or manager, or you run a distribution company. I know we have a diverse audience here, so that's regardless of where you're at in the industry, want you to be able to pull things out of here and see how it applies to what you do. So I think it would be fitting just to start with identifying what ActivMotion training is. I'm sure most of you are familiar with our products, the ActivMotion bars. We'll cover that as well, but I want to go over what ActivMotion training is first, and kind of the gap that it fills that exists in a lot of programming. So I created the ActivMotion bar and this concept about 3 years ago, and I mentioned we launched in 2014. And the whole essence, the whole reason why I created this was the foundation was an understanding of this idea that our world isn't static and isolated as a lot of us train and a lot of us are taught to train. Instead, our world is dynamic and active, right? There's all these nuances that exist, in our movement, internally and externally, that affect everything we do, right? Nothing is static and isolated, it's dynamic and active. So I wanted to take this concept and integrate it into a tool that kind of simulated this unpredictability in movement that we deal with every day. So that's essentially the essence of active motion training is dealing with this what we call active resistance to increase our functional fitness and kind of break through the limits that we either perceive exist or that do exist in our physical abilities so we can achieve more. And we say that we like to do more with less because according to the research that exists behind active motion training, you'll see a little bit down the road here that we can use less resistance and still get the same activation benefits and mind muscle benefits in our training, which is awesome. So again, just to hammer the point home, the ideas that I had when creating this system started with putting this functional instability in the hands to facilitate all these great responses in our bodies, right? Also, a goal was to be able to find and sense these imbalances so that we can work on correcting them, all in the name of the fact that our environment is variable and unpredictable, so that we should be training this way with our clients and ourselves. And I'm not trying to say active motion training and active motion bar is the be all end all. Please do not take it that way. All we're saying here is that this is a gap that exists in a lot of programming, and everyone can benefit from it, and everyone needs to be engaging in it. Okay. So that's what active motion training is, and I promise we're going to come back to that in a second. But to tie in our products with active motion training, so in order to accomplish this, we use the active motion bars, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with this, so I won't spend a lot of time. But active motion bars are hollow. They come in various weights. Inside, we call active resistance, right? It's the active resistance is actually ball bearings, right? That shift smoothly and gently within the active motion bar to create this really unique stimulus to our body. So when I refer to the weight shifting inside the active motion bar, or when we refer to it in our education, when we're out doing workshops and working with fitness professionals, we refer to it as active resistance. It's a simple way to convey the idea that the mass that we're lifting isn't static like most other fitness tools. Instead, it's active, right? It's dynamic. It's active resistance because it's moving as we move. So that's the active motion bar. They come in various weights and sizes. We have a 4 foot, 4.5 pound active motion bar, typically used in the Pilates setting and when working with active adults and in that setting. That's the only active motion bar that's shorter. And we just launched that at the beginning of this year out of demand from Pilates studios, actually, because they found that they needed an active motion bar that was lighter and shorter for that modality, which is completely understandable. So that's been doing very well. And then our other active motion bars are 6, 8, 10, 15, and 18 pounds. Those are all 5 feet in length. They vary in diameter slightly. And again, they all produce this unstable, really unique mind muscle requirement as we train because of that active resistance shifting inside. So we've got a little cutaway of a transparent bar down there to show you kind of what that looks like. And we're going to see some animations later that kind of show how this impacts the body. So now, one question I get, and honestly it's not too often, but I think it's important to address this when presenting this to a lot of you for the first time, is someone always asks, well, how's this different than a sand or water-filled tool? And I like to answer that question. I'm not going to read this word for word, by the way. You're free to, and if you want a copy of this PowerPoint later on, you ask me and I'll give it to you. But basically how it's different is the whole reason why I wanted to create the active motion bar was because those sand and water filled tools were simply too heavy and cumbersome for about 90% of the people that I trained, right? We don't all train boot camp style elite athletes. And I think those sand and water filled products are terrific solutions for that setting. But instead, I wanted to bring this really unique active resistance stimulus to everyone else. That's why we can make our active motion bars as little as 4.5 pounds, and they only go up to 18 pounds. So that's basically the reason how it's different, right? There are also some other bullet points in here that you're free to read that explain, that can distinguish, the active resistance and the active motion bar from other tools filled with water and sand and shot and things like that. It's very valid reasons too. For example, another one here would be in a lot of our programming, there's a lot of dynamic bending and twisting movements. And you can imagine what might happen if we're holding a 20-pound slosh pipe and I'm doing a lateral flexion or a rotational movement pattern. It's just, for most people, it's not safe. It's not happening. So feel free to read on or request a PowerPoint later and you can learn how it's distinguished more, right? Another thing that I want to make sure we don't do here is put active motion training into one category. So we just have this slide here created to let everyone understand the fact that active motion training is for everybody, and it's used in a lot of different contexts too. So we have some of the customers on the outside of the slide, and then some of the other modalities where active motion training is implemented, bringing value to fitness facilities and members and people every day. So just keep this in mind. And going back to one of the first slides I showed you, I want you to leave this presentation with a takeaway of how this can work for you in your setting. This slide kind of highlights all the areas that it can bring value. So now what I want to do here is go through some of the science, right? I think I can talk about how great active motion training is all day long, but this is a foundations course, and we want to cover the science first because that's going to really show you how this is going to add value, right? So let's go in a little bit into the science. Now, I'm not going to get to exercise sciencey, clinical physiologist. I'm not going to really wear that hat today for you. If you want to have a conversation like that, you contact me directly and we can. Instead, I'm just going to kind of cover the basics. So I like this slide a lot because it kind of encompasses everything that we try to teach in our training. If you look on the left-hand side of the slide, you'll see these internal regulation systems that our body has that provides feedback to our central nervous system to allow us to determine where our body is in space, right? So based on what we see and what we feel and what this vestibular system tells us, this is our inner ear fluid system, these systems provide our central nervous system with feedback. And based on that, our central nervous system sends these action potentials, right, or these little small electrical impulses through our nerves in our body to our muscle tissue to allow them to contract. It's basically, how we move and we react in our environment. And this is a continuous process, hence the feedback loop that exists here. So as we're moving in space every day, it doesn't matter whether or not we're in the gym or walking down the street, all these systems are engaged to regulate where we are in space and help us stay safe, right? So this is a really important slide though, because through active motion training, one of the foundational concepts here is that we want to heighten these senses in order to sync up the mind and muscles more, right? So think about that for a second. We really emphasize what we feel, hear, and see during active motion training to get these systems heightened, right? Create this heightened sense of awareness so that we can be more mindful of our movement and correct imbalances and sense where we are in space and create more coordination, more core strength, and strength around our joints. So that's why this slide is so important. So keep this in mind in this whole feel, hear, see concept as we're heightening these senses actually become cues when we're cueing an exercise in active motion training, which is really cool too. So we're going to go over those cues later. But again, very important concept here for you just to understand the systems that regulate, our body's sense of position, and then that feedback loop and how we can heighten those senses through active motion training to create more purposeful and mindful movement. Okay, and then we get into, all the stuff that members and our clients care about, which are aesthetics, right? Core strength and, looking good and all that stuff too. We'll talk about that later on. This is just the sciencey part, okay? To back up what I'm teaching you even more, it's very important for me to cover a study that was conducted at the University of Michigan, which pretty much provides proof in lots of credibility in what I'm delivering to you here today. So The University of Michigan has a very advanced school of kinesiology, and they do a lot of research. And lately, the school has gotten, over the past 2 years actually, a lot of funding to look at training for our active aging population, our seniors, right? So there's a statistic out there. Every day we have about 10,000 people here in the US that are turning 65 years of age. Talk about a great opportunity, right? Not only an opportunity for us as fitness professionals to increase our revenue, but also a great opportunity to just help people, right? And that at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help people feel better and live longer. And so U of M was in the middle of a study, and since we're based here in Michigan, they asked us if we wanted to have ActivMotion bars be part of one of the studies they were doing. And so just to preface before I deliver this, the university was not compensated for what they did. We were not involved in really putting anything together in any way. This was all University of Michigan, so they could have found that ActivMotion bars had no effect on the body, and that would have been bad. But fortunately, that didn't happen. But this was all done by U of M and some of their researchers and their exercise physiologists and the professors. So important for you to understand that. So basically, what they did was they did this study where they brought a bunch of people into their lab, and they used this EMG technology. If you're not familiar with surface EMG, basically these images do a good job at kind of showing what it is. It's these sensors that we can place on the skin and measure the extent to which muscles activate, right? Because I mentioned earlier, muscles activate through electrical impulses that are conducted through our body. So through a series of ion fluctuations, right, sodium, potassium, we have these action potentials arrive at the neuromuscular junction, and through a series of chemical reactions, our muscles contract, right? It's a beautiful thing. And these sensors can measure the extent to which that happens. So basically what they did was they put various fitness tools in people's hands. They put these sensors all over the body and measured the extent to which muscles contracted. And they also used this inertial measurement unit technology, which instead of measuring muscle activation allows us to look at joint angles. So they're actually able to measure range of motion to see and just pretty much qualify that people are moving in the same range of motion during these exercises because different tools are being used, and we want to make sure that valid and reliable results are obtained, right? So for example, if someone's doing a squat with one tool and they're only going halfway down, and then they pick up another tool and they go all the way down, the muscle activation results are going to be different, right? So we need to make sure that the data is valid and reliable across the board. So we use these inertial measurement units to make sure that everyone's moving in the same range of motion. And I'm sorry, I keep saying we. I mean the exercise physiologist that did the study. Okay, so again, a little breakdown of the study that I'm going to reference here. Active participants, all 30 to 50 years of age, they all did a standardized random series of exercises. The tools that were compared in this case were standard weighted bars, so I'm sure we were all familiar with the aerobic bars, medicine balls, and the ActivMotion bar. All right. And here are the results. I'm just going to skip over all the other stuff. If you want to see the full printout of the study, it is on our website right on the homepage if you want to read over all the details. But basically, every participant during every exercise experienced greater muscle activation at a very significant level when they use the ActivMotion bar, right? So on the left-hand side here, you can see this graph that just shows one of the comparison models and activation. You can see the ActivMotion bar significantly outperforming the other tools. And then on the right side here, you can see an anatomical figure showing where these sensors were placed and the areas that the ActivMotion bar significantly activated those muscles to a greater extent. I always get the question, why weren't there EMG sensors placed on the glutes of the hamstrings, the biggest muscles in the body? I can't answer that question because I wasn't a part of this. So the researchers, I think their main objective here was to look at muscles of the core. And as we know, the core is defined as the lumbopelvic hip complex, and glutes are definitely a part of our core. But I guess they wanted to look at things from the waist up in the majority. So that's what you see here. Either way, really what this says is that, this is a very valid way to train, and it really brings a lot of value to everything that we're trying to do as fitness professionals and helping people improve their fitness and their strength. So just directly out of the study, in a lot of cases during some movements, the ActivMotion bars outperformed the other tools by twofold, with averages being closer to 20 to 40% more, still very, very significant. Other results that were derived out of the study are shown here, and I'm not going to read these word for word. You can feel free to or go over this later, but basically, when we're talking about more muscle activation, there's a lot of other good things that happen too as we're training, such as greater caloric expenditure. Obviously, as we're having more muscles engaged, we're consuming more oxygen, we're utilizing more ATP to get those muscles activated, therefore we're expending more calories. Awesome, another great added value benefit. Improved strength, balance, less injuries. This is all covered in greater detail on the actual research report, which can be found on the homepage of the website if you're interested in seeing that. All right. Another concept that's very important to understand here is how biomechanics affects the body. And this kind of just sums up really well why active motion training produces the effects that you just saw in that research study. Basically, let's look at these two figures here. We have on the left-hand side, we have a figure engaging in a lateral flexion movement with a static weight. On the right-hand side, there's an active motion bar. Look at the green line that divides each figure vertically. That would reference our center of mass, right? So as we're using a static resistance, you can see that center of mass pretty much stays right in line with the center of the figure. But as we're using the active motion bar, because that resistance is displaced further outside the center of mass, right? So look at that red arrow. That's measuring the length of that lever. Our center of mass changes. It moves more. So what's going to happen? Well, either we're going to fall over, or the opposite side of our body is going to contract to maintain our center of mass. And this is what takes place during active motion training, right? We have all these different vectors of force acting on our body as that weight shifts inside the bar. So as we're trying to deal with all this shifting of resistance, all this active resistance moving, all these force vectors act and engage the body to keep centered and stable. And that's the whole, that kind of ties everything together in terms of how and why the active motion bar causes more activation through the body, okay? So let's get a little bit now into the actual training system, okay? This is, I kind of laid the rationale, right? Hopefully you're buying into everything that I'm saying, and everything in terms of the science and active motion training and active motion bar makes sense. So now I really want to show you how we would go in and whenever we're presenting a workshop or we're working with fitness professionals, how we would teach this training system, right? And the thought process that went into this by that team of educators that I referenced earlier. So, and it's really simple too. I find a lot of these companies that deliver their education really complicate their education so much that by the end of it, all fitness professionals get is a couple of cool new exercises to implement in their classes or with clients. And really, there's not a really sound system or a rationale laid out for why they're doing what they're doing. So, I was a trainer for a long time prior to starting this company, and I've taken part in a lot of those certification trainings, and I really wanted to keep this simple and user-friendly and really just try to add as much value as we can without complicating things. So we follow this really simple system that is active motion training. 3 phases, right? We have disrupt, discover, and define. And these 3 phases each have different outcomes associated with them and different exercises. So this slide kind of lays out how these phases are different. And I'm going to explain each phase a little bit here, and then we're going to walk through some of the cues that we use in when teaching exercises, and then we're going to actually go through a couple of movement patterns in each of these phases of training so you can understand how these phases differentiated from one another and the context that they can be implemented into. And by context, I mean, one phase lends itself better to working in the Pilates modality, while one phase lends itself better to working with active adults, or maybe one phase works better with athletes. So we'll go into all that in a little bit. But I'm going to go to the next slide here because this is a little bit easier to understand these three phases. So at the foundational level, we have this phase called disrupt. And then we progress to discover, and then we progress to define. So define would be the peak, disrupt would be the foundation. So let's pretend like we're working with a new client and they're completely deconditioned, right? And not too familiar with exercise. The way we're taught as fitness professionals through a lot of the certification that we obtain is to follow this system where we're focusing first on developing stability, and then developing strength, and then developing athletic power, right? No matter what certification you get, usually that's the same protocol. Well, we followed that same protocol in our training because it's very valid, it's scientifically proven, and it works extremely well in active motion training. So I want you to look up at the chart up at the top. 3 phases: disrupt, discover, define. We have keywords associated with each phase. In the disrupt phase, we're focusing on activation, right? We're focusing on stability, strength. That's the goal here. These are all small movement patterns that are done in order to create stability around the spine and pelvis. That is extremely important. So before we ask the body to move dynamically, right, we need to make sure that we can create stability. We can create that anchor that is our core and have it engaged so we can move our extremities effectively and safely. So this disrupt phase is all about teaching activation, coordinated activation, to be able to control our body in stable positions. Okay, so that's where we would start. That's the foundation. Most of these exercises are done on the floor in again, movements that are small in nature. We're not asking the body to do too much. We're asking it to stabilize. Okay, once we've taught the ability to stabilize, right? We've taught all those muscles around the spine and pelvis to be able to stabilize those major systems. Then we can mobilize the spine. Then we can ask our extremities to move. Then we can move more dynamically. That's when we progress to the discover phase. So the key word there is integration. Now we can integrate more movement. So we go from activation to integration, where we're moving more now. Now we're standing. Now we're moving more dynamically. So here we might be doing like a lunge pattern or something like that while we're trying to keep the ActivMotion bar stable, as we're always adjusting, making these micro adjustments to the shifting resistance. And after we've been able to create strength in that context, then we move to this last phase of training, which is define, where we work on those big reactive dynamic exercises where instead of just trying to keep the ActivMotion bar parallel now and trying to keep stability strength obtained, we're actually purposely tipping and tilting the ActivMotion bar, getting that weight inside to create momentum that kind of challenges us in a multiplanar sense. So that's when we expand into those big dynamic athletic exercises. So hopefully that's a clear progression: disrupt, activation, discover. We integrate, we mobilize the body more, and define. Now we're moving in big, complex movement patterns, challenging lots of different systems in the body, and working to a much greater extent. So that's the training system. Okay, we're going to come back to that in just a second and visit exercises in each phase. But before we do that, I want to go over the cues, that how we would teach these exercises, right? So before I ask you to, pick up your ActivMotion bar and engage in one of these exercises, I got to make sure I know how to teach you the movements. So again, this is a very simple cueing system, and we're going to go over it for just about 5 minutes here, and then move back onto some of the exercises. So we have grip, bar position, physical feedback, audible feedback, and tempo and rhythm, right? So we're going to instruct how to hold the ActivMotion bar. We're going to tell whether or not we're trying to keep it stable or parallel to the floor, or we're purposely tipping and tilting it, trying to create momentum. We're going to want to tell our client or member what they should feel, right? Because remember, this is a proprioceptive, very mind-muscle experience, and we want them to adjust their sense of their position based on what they feel. We also want to cue them what they should be hearing. And this is where that feedback loop comes back into play, how we're creating more mind-muscle awareness because we're paying more attention to what's going on in our training environment. Okay, so we pay attention to the audible feedback, and then we cue tempo and rhythm just to make sure a sound, safe pace is being engaged in. So let's go through each little phase here, or I'm sorry, each little cue, starting with grip. Again, you guys, this is really simple. 3 variations of grip. There's little white lines printed on the ActivMotion bar exactly at 18 inches in from each end. Okay, those white lines are reference points to where to hold onto the bar so that we can create symmetry. So the same amount of static weight is displaced from right to left on the body, right? So grip number 1 is just a simple bilateral grip right on those white lines. 2, and this is just for the much more advanced exercises, right? This is definitely not where we would start with a client anyway, is a unilateral grip with a single hand. And there's a logo, an ActivMotion bar logo, right in the center of the bar. And believe it or not, it's not just for branding. That's actually another reference point. That logo was printed dead center on that bar so that we have another reference point to grip. Okay, so that's grip number 2, single hand. And number 3 is offset. So during some movements, we're going to purposely hold the bar with 2 hands off to one side. And as you can see here from a biomechanical standpoint under grip number 3, there's much more length of that ActivMotion bar off to one side of the body now. And what happens when the weight shifts over to that side? So you can imagine it's really gonna, force the body to brace the core and engage so that the body doesn't tip over. So that offset grip is another one that's advanced. And these are the 3 different grip styles that we would teach in ActivMotion training. All right, let's move on to cue number 2. So after I cue grip, I want to let people know what position, what we're trying to do with the ActivMotion bar. We're either trying to keep it parallel to the floor. So say, just to keep things simple, I'm doing a lunge and I have the bar at my chest and I'm just trying to keep the load stable. I'm trying to keep the weight in the center. During other exercises, I would instruct the client, as we move into that defined phase, that we're going to purposely tip the bar to one side as we bend or twist to get that weight to shift all the way to one end to create that activation, right? So 2 simple methods of use. 1, we're trying to keep stable, bar parallel. 2, we're purposely tipping and tilting the bar, all right? Pretty simple. That's cue number 2. Number 3 and 4, I looped into the same slide here. We're definitely going to want to make sure we instruct what should be felt and what we should hear. So this is really cool and it's really simple, you guys. This, all these cues can be literally referenced in one sentence. I'm just kind of going into detail here. But physical feedback, meaning, and I just referenced it, you either want to feel the weight in the center as you're trying to stabilize, or you want to feel it shifting from one side to the other as you bend and twist. That would be our physical feedback cue. Audible is during those exercises where we're trying to keep the ActivMotion bar parallel to the floor, like in this movement here where this woman is doing a bridge. She is paying great attention to not only what she feels, right? She feels the vibration from those weights shifting inside the bar, that active resistance, but she's also paying attention to what she hears. So the cue here would be to keep the bar quiet. And that really ties into that mind-muscle feedback loop that we were discussing earlier, how we incorporate that audible feedback into our training, right? So that's physical and audible feedback as cues. And then the last one is tempo and rhythm. And this basically we teach this to ensure that the instructor or trainer is just making sure that the client is moving at a safe, controlled tempo and rhythm. Obviously, a lot of the exercises can be done at a slow pace or a fast pace, depending on what the desired outcome is, right? But that's why tempo and rhythm is a cue in here as well. And again, I'm not going to read all this stuff verbatim because I think it gets really boring, when presentations are made like that. But again, this is going to be recorded. You can reference it later or just ask me for the PowerPoint presentation. I'm happy to send it out to you. But those are our 5 cues again, okay? So let's go back real quick. Grip, bar position, physical feedback, audible feedback, and tempo and rhythm. Okay, so let's go through a couple of exercises now and see how we would cue this. So each exercise in our training manual is laid out like this. This is a video that I'm going to play for you in a second. But you can see over on the left-hand side here, this is how we would cue each exercise, right? Start grip, bar position, physical feedback, audible feedback, and tempo. Now, pay attention to those cues, but also pay attention to the training phase that we're working within that's stated up in the upper left-hand corner of each slide. Remember how we had disrupt, discover, and define. What we're going to do right now is go through 3 exercises, 1 in each phase. And each exercise is going to progress from disrupt to discover to define in similar positions so that you can see how we would take a movement pattern, start in the disrupt phase where we are focusing on activation. Then we take that same movement pattern and progress to discover, which involves more mobility, right? And then we would reach define, which is that big dynamic phase. So let's go through each one of these real quick. I'm going to play the slide that's presented by our master trainer, Robert Sherman.
Heel taps. In this exercise, you're going to lie back slowly. Place the bar on the front of your thighs. Create pressure into the bar, holding that position. Flex the ankles, and you're going to tap your front leg down to the floor and lift back up. The activation here is created by putting pressure on the bar into your leg and then keeping the bar stable as you move. The bar itself is quiet. To increase intensity, lift the head up a little higher, reach the heel a little bit further. To decrease, lie down and still control the movement. That way, you have an option on the exercise. Heel taps.
Well done, Robert. Well done. All right. So that was a movement that would take place in the disrupt phase of training, right? Not a lot of movement going on there. It's more about activation, controlling that unstable resistance as we make these micro adjustments based on what we feel, what we hear taking place inside the bar, right? And as that weight is shifting, because the reality is we're never going to be able to keep the weight in the center, but that's a good thing as we're making these adjustments. That's why we get all those additional muscle activation benefits, because we're always making these adjustments. We're always acting and reacting, right? So hopefully you picked up on all the cues that Robert went through there. He did it in about 20 seconds, and that's how easy it is to teach these exercises. So now let's take the same movement, right? These heel taps, where we're focusing on activation. So right there, we were holding a contraction in our abdomen as we were pressing the ActivMotion bar into the thighs, creating that activation, and really working on all those muscles that stabilize our spine and pelvis, right? So now let's assume that we've created that stability strength. We're going to progress to the discover phase. The same movement progressed to the discover phase. So let's see what this looks like.
Pull over tuck. In this exercise, we start lying down. As you lie down, bring your legs up and bring the bar just gently above the chest. Lift your body into flexion, holding that bar, keeping it stable. Reach the bar overhead as you extend the legs out. Pull back in as you create the tuck. Pull over and tuck. Increasing intensity. Reach the bar way back and your legs out. Feel your back stay flat on top. Reach all the way out. Pull back in and hold. That was pull over tuck.
All right, so hopefully there you obviously saw more movement taking place, right? So there we integrated movement of the extremities while still focusing on the anterior, the front side of the body, abdominal muscle activation, but now we're asking the body to do more. So as we incorporate more movement, it gets harder to keep that bar stable and level, right? I don't know if you noticed there, but Robert was always kind of tilting right to left, trying to keep that weight stabilized. And again, that just goes into all the additional activation and mind muscle benefits that take place as we're engaging in active motion training. Okay, so we went from disrupt to discover, heel taps to pull over tucks. Now let's go into the next phase, which is define. And this is where we incorporate resistance in the way of momentum. Now there's no audio here, so I'm just going to play this video and kind of talk through it. But you're going to be able to easily see how this phase is distinguished from the other two. Obviously here, we are now creating much more intensity as the weight inside the bar, we're not trying to keep it stable, but as we move from one side to the other, every time the weight inside that bar shifts to the side that this animated figure is paddling towards, it's creating more activation in the trunk, right? It's kind of like the same concept as when you're doing medicine ball tosses from one side to the other, and you catch that ball and it pulls you further into that rotation, right? I just referenced that because it's this very similar concept. You've got this momentum created by the resistance inside the bar that travels to the side you're rotating towards. That momentum pulls you further in that direction, forcing the activation throughout the body to keep yourself stable. So that is just a really good illustration, those three exercises, of the ActivMotion training system and how we would progress from an activation movement, which is where we're taught as fitness professionals to start with our clients, all the way up to these big dynamic reactive exercises. In our programming, we have programs built out that are specific to each phase, right? So Disrupt would have a program based on muscle activation and creating stability around the spine and pelvis. Obviously, something like that lends itself really well to when we're working with beginners or active adults or in the Pilates setting, right? All very valuable everywhere, but those are some of the specific areas that utilize movements in that phase of training. We have programs in the Discover phase that are focused more on balance and the development of strength as we're doing various squat and lunge patterns, right? Which pretty much can fall into any group exercise or personal training type program. And then we have the Define phase, which incorporates all this dynamic bending and twisting. A lot of this is utilized in our sport-specific training programs like golf fitness and things like that. But again, you don't really put it into any one category. I'm just referencing where these phases become popular. Most of our customers and people we work with don't look this deep into the training system, and instead just pull out their favorite exercises and engage in those, and create programs that are focused on the whole system. So we would have bits and pieces from each phase that we would pull out. All right. Just other touch points here, in some of our, with a lot of the fitness facilities that use ActivMotion bars, they use it in a ton of different ways. It's one of the beauties of implementing ActivMotion training. And they're more intense, like boot camp style classes, or higher intensity interval training classes or sessions with clients. A lot of that single grip type movements are used. So here, we can do lunges and plank variations with reaches and sit-ups and windmills and all this great stuff as well. So that's just wanted to touch on some other ways that we can incorporate ActivMotion training into classes and things. And then here are just highlighting some other movement patterns. We have the figure up on the upper left here doing a lunge while they're trying to keep that weight stable, a rotational standing exercise, a steering wheel squat. And then another area that I didn't really touch on a whole lot because, again, this is just the foundations course. We're not really doing a deep dive into the education or programming part. But we do use the ActivMotion bar down on the floor in various plank positions and use those end caps and hand marks as reference points actually to reach the hands and feet towards. So to break up the monotony of holding on to the ActivMotion bar for a long period of time, we'll actually get down on the floor, do all these cool creative plank exercises. So the bottom right here, you can see the figure just reaching 1 foot for the end cap as they're holding a high plank position. So lots of programming possibilities, and it's all really bringing a tremendous amount of value to the people that we work with. So I thought it would be cool to kind of, I can sit up here as the founder of the company and talk all day about why what we do is great and the value that we're adding to people, but for our customers. But I think it's important for people who are just getting familiar with our business, like most of you on here, maybe hear it from someone else. So here are some quotes that you can go ahead and read from some of our customers that are just really positive, and I think it goes to show and prove really our focus as a company, not only on creating great innovative programs and products and education that bring value to people, but also our focus on the customer, right? Funny story. I worked at a company called Gordon Food Service, in college when I was going to Central Michigan University, and they had this mantra, "Customer is king." And I worked there for 5 years, and the level of success that the company had over the course of those 5 years that I worked there was incredible. How much they grew, and I saw that it was all because of the level of focus that they put on their customer and the amount of value that they brought in the way of service to their customer. So not only great products, but great customer service. So I guess what I'm getting at here is the reason why we're able to grow our business, at a pretty fast pace. Not only is because we have great offerings, but because of the attention that we give to our customers and the fact that we truly want them and their members to succeed and build strength and value in everything that they do. So again, a couple quotes, feel free to read away. And if you don't get a chance to read them here, I will make sure that you all get a copy of this PowerPoint. Some more information to reference here that I want to touch on. We have some of our social channels up there. I really recommend going to our YouTube channel for a lot more great educational content, because there's, I think looking at video really does a better job than written content at kind of explaining these concepts. So we have a ton of videos uploaded on there, not only from us, but from other fitness professionals and customers and testimonials and, great things that you can pay attention to on there. And then happy to share with you also our training manuals. So we have a golf specific manual. We also have our general training manual, which is actually about 100 pages long. It really does a deep dive into the education, and that would be something that we would deliver in one of our full ActivMotion training certifications, right? So if anyone wants a link to that, to the PDF, I'm very happy to send it out. Since we are going to be wrapping up in about 5 minutes, you guys, if there are any questions, please go ahead and go into that chat function and type them in right now. I've got a couple, but I just want to encourage you to do that as I'm wrapping this up, because I'm planning on taking like the last 10 minutes to go through questions, okay? Man, we only had like half the people who signed up attend. Note that for next time. And then, okay, a couple of other touch points, specialty modules that we also offer to our customers. If you want to get specific on the populations we're serving, there's some specialty modules down here. So do a lot of work with our active adult and senior specific or senior oriented training facilities and programs. We have bar programming, as I mentioned, the golf and tennis specific stuff, lots and lots of success in Pilates studios, not only in individually owned and operated, but also Pilates studios that are part of a larger club. Sergeant Ken Weichert, who's master trainer for Spry, does our boot camps, which is awesome, and that has been very well received. And actually, Sergeant Ken is bringing us to a lot of international markets in his boot camp programming, which is really cool. We have a yoga module, which is taught by Robert Sherman, and then we also have obviously our full 8-hour certification that is more oriented towards just integrating the entire system. So in our certification, we would cover literally everything. And then there's also a really robust teach back session that's involved there too, because another reason why I think we've been able to have a lot of success is because we make sure that everyone who teaches ActivMotion training is well educated and really has a very sound understanding of who we are and what we do and what we try to deliver to people on a day-to-day basis. So that is the end. We do have a couple questions that I'm going to ask or answer right now. I think a couple were submitted to the entire audience here, and then a couple were submitted to me specifically. So let's go through a couple of the ones that were submitted to the entire audience. All pricing, you guys, can be found on our website. And obviously, when we're working with larger customers that are fitness facilities, we do volume discounts, and and that's kind of on an individual basis. Sometimes we have clubs that want to integrate for personal training and just want a couple ActivMotion bars, and some want 70 ActivMotion bars for group fitness and Pilates, and go all out. So each situation is very different. Also, along with that, education is heavily discounted when we're working, on a larger implementation. And go along with that, someone asked me about the implementation process. We have a full implementation kit that breaks everything down in terms of integrating the ActivMotion bars into pre-existing classes. So maybe instead of just wanting to offer ActivMotion training, we just want to give existing classes new life. Well, we can show you how to do that in a very simple way. And then for those who want to actually add ActivMotion training, either in small group or group setting, we can do that as well. And then, obviously using in a personal training context, there's education solutions available for that too. So another question that I had asked to me, and I think this one was sent in a private way, was what's the difference between the ActivMotion bar and a sandbag? So man, I could go on for a long time about this, but by nature, right? Let's look at sand and its structure. If I were to take a sandbag and just tilt it from right to left, I would have to tip it very drastically to get that weight to shift, right? So it's not really dynamic. It's actually moves with gravity. It's pretty static. The active resistance inside the ActivMotion bar will shift at the slightest deviation from parallel, which again brings all those mind-body benefits and activation, and really starts to challenge the body in a completely different way as that weight travels from one side of the bar all the way to the other as we're moving with it. Hopefully that can answer that question for you. Okay, I'm going to move this over a little bit. We do work with in the corrective exercise setting. So I'm not sure if we have physical therapists with us here, or maybe Czech or Gray Institute certified individuals, but typically our 4.5 pound ActivMotion bar, which is the shorter, lighter one, is used in a lot of really cool ways. And there's actually some great YouTube content that physical therapists have recently posted on YouTube showing how to use the ActivMotion bar in that setting. But typically it's used for creating stability strength in the shoulders and in the trunk. And so we do have packages that are kind of tailor fit to whatever our customers need to answer that question. Yes, so we can help you come up with a solution that's fit for your specific group of people that you work with and treat. And that's just as simple as talking to either myself or one of our other our salespeople to determine that. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Our exclusive distributor for our 4.5 pound ActivMotion bar is actually OPTP. So for those of you who are interested in that product, that's the shorter ActivMotion bar, go on to OPTP's website, which is just optp.com. And they are a phenomenal partner of ours, a great group of people over there as well. And they can help you out with the 4.5 pound variation. Okay, a very well educated staff, and definitely get in touch with them on that. Okay. Just one last question I see here that came through to me, and then we're going to wrap this up. Someone asked me, how would I use this in my athletic training business? Man, that's kind of a general question, and again, I can spend a lot of time answering that question. I can tell you this: the majority of the people that we work with, who work with athletes specifically, use the ActivMotion bars in one of two ways. Okay, the first would be using it in a dynamic warm-up setting. So in athletic training, I think we know that this is a group that traditionally lifts significant levels of resistance, much heavier than 8 pounds. But the strength coaches really like using the ActivMotion bars to get those muscles turned on prior to challenging them with heavier amounts of resistance and more explosive movement. So we actually have a lot of athletic facilities that use the ActivMotion bars to warm up with during those stability and multiplanar exercises, because again, we saw the science, right? There's all those activation benefits you get out of using the ActivMotion bar. Well, warming up, that's the main goal, right? To get the muscles activated and primed for a greater challenge. So that's one way we have our athletic training facilities use them. The second is they'll use them. They'll use ActivMotion bars and ActivMotion training and a lot of those dynamic bending and twisting movements to increase core strength, because we know, all of our movement starts in the center, right? We need to create that anchor, create that trunk stability, and so that's the context. The second context that a lot of our athletic training customers would use the ActivMotion bars in is during those multiplanar movements and during those disrupt activation type exercises. Okay, hopefully that answered your question. I kind of jumped around everywhere there. One last cool touch point. We did just partner with the National Academy of Sports Medicine to work with them in a lot of different ways, which is really exciting. So if any of you are NASM certified and want to learn more about that, please contact me. They're going to be offering some cool discount education deals going on through ActivMotion training in the coming months. And I guess that's it, you guys. Really appreciate your time and your attention to this little foundations workshop. Happy to answer more questions for you, on any front. So please feel free to reach out. My email address is right here. We have an 888 number where you can either talk to myself or another representative. And again, we are so focused on helping people excel and adding value to their business, and we'd love to be able to help you do that. So appreciate your time. Thanks for the attention, and hopefully we'll see you on the next training. We're going to be doing this bi-weekly, and we're going to start breaking it out into specific areas. So one week we might focus on Pilates, another week we might focus on ActivMotion training for the active adult. So good stuff to come. We're going to open it up to more people too. So instead of having only 25, hopefully we'll be having hundreds, which we probably could have this time, but whatever. So thanks again, appreciate it, and reach out if you have any questions. All right, guys, thank you.